Ever feel like modern life is just one big rushed blur? Well, today we're going the opposite direction, way back. Think pyramids, hieroglyphs, that Indiana Jones vibe. Yep, it's ancient Egypt. Specifically, it's the Egyptian language that we'll be diving into today. We've got some incredible sources here. Not only did they span its 4,000-year history seriously, longer than any writing system we've found, but they also reveal the hows and whys of its structure. It's not just about deciphering, but understanding how Egyptians actually communicated. I'm ready to go full-on time traveler here. Where do we even start with a language that old?
Well, the most important thing to remember is that ancient Egyptian isn't a monolith. It's more like a living river, constantly changing over time. We break its lifespan down into distinct phases: archaic, old, middle, late, Demotic, and finally Coptic. Each reflects not just time passing, but how pronunciation, grammar, even what the USD, the language for, shifted,
So it's like each phase had its own personality. I'm curious, what clues do we even have to understand those shifts?
One of the most, one of the most thrilling finds for understanding early Egyptian was the oldest complete sentence we've got on a tomb seal from 2690 BC. It reads, DMSST, DMFWJ in ZF, NSW.TBJTJ, PRJB.SNJ. Now that might look like gibberish, but in English it translates to, he has united the two lands for his son, dual King Peribsen.
Okay, I admit, hearing it read aloud like that, it gives me goosebumps. But it's a simple sentence, right? What makes it so important to understanding Egyptian back then?
It's a window into so much more than just vocabulary. That single sentence, it gives us clues about their early grammar, how they structured their thoughts, even hints about the political landscape. Remember, this is from a time when uniting Egypt under one ruler was a huge deal.
It makes you realize the weight those words must have carried. It's one thing to see hieroglyphs in a museum, but to think of them conveying these power shifts. Okay, I'm hooked. But let's back up a bit. How do we even know what these symbols mean? Was it really all crack thanks to the Rosetta Stone, like in the movies?
The Rosetta Stone was huge no doubt. But even before that, scholars were piecing together clues. Hieroglyphs are tricky because they're more than just pictures. A single one can represent a sound, like an alphabet, or R, a whole idea. It's like a language built on double meanings.
So how do you even begin to untangle that? Were ancient dictionaries lying around somewhere?
Not quite. It took comparing texts, analyzing patterns, even looking at how Egyptian words were borrowed and written in other languages, like Akkadian with its cuneiform. It was serious linguistic detective work.
Okay, that is impressive. But with a language this old, isn't there still a lot of guesswork?
You're right to be skeptical. Even today, with all our tools, we're working with approximations. The pronunciation most Egyptologists use, it's called a Egyptological pronunciation, is more for consistency than perfect accuracy. We can't travel back in time to hear how it really sounded.
So when I see documentaries saying King Tut, they're probably making an educated guess.
Exactly. Take that name, for example. We emphasize the T sound, but back then it was likely closer to a D. Tutankhamun has a whole other ring to it, right?
Tutankhamun, it does. You never think about how much pronunciation changes over time, especially for names we consider so set. It's like those hieroglyphs. More going on beneath the surface than you'd think. Speaking of those hieroglyphs, how did they actually form words? Was it just randomly slapping symbols together?
Not random at all. Ancient Egyptian had its own internal logic, often built around a root concept, usually 3 consonants. Think of it like a linguistic Lego set. You've got your base, then add vowels or other sounds to modify the meaning.
Okay, so it's like those core consonants carry the essence of the word and the extra bits make it specific. Were there a lot of rules around that?
Rules, patterns, definitely. And this system of roots is actually something it shares with other Afro-Asiatic languages. Arabic, Hebrew, they all have echoes of this. It's like tracing a family tree back through language itself.
I never realized those connections were so deep. It's like even as languages evolve, they still carry traces of their ancestors.
Precisely. And speaking of evolution, let's talk about how they handle things like grammar, those nuts and bolts that make a language tick. Did ancient Egyptian have genders for its nouns, for example, like many languages do today?
Right, like in Spanish, it's el sol for the sun, la luna for the moon, each with their designated article. Did Egyptians do that?
They did. Masculine and feminine nouns were definitely a thing. But here's where it gets intriguing for language nerds like us. They also had something called the construct state. It's a feature they share with, you guessed it, Arabic and Hebrew again.
Okay, construct state. Sounds official. Lay it on me. What's so special about this?
It's a way to show possession without needing a separate word for of. Imagine instead of saying the palace of the pharaoh, you could combine the words for palace and pharaoh in a specific way to express the same idea. Elegant, efficient.
That's actually pretty cool. Less words, but you still get the meaning across. Were their verbs equally streamlined?
Verbs. Those could be a bit more complex, shall we say. They had different forms, not just for the usual suspects past, present, future, but to pack in extra nuance. Was an action ongoing, finished, done out of habit, all conveyed by tweaking the verb itself.
So it's like built-in emotionality to their words. I'd love to see a modern language try that. Was it just subtle shades, or could you get dramatic with it?
While we may not have entire moods dedicated to sarcasm, though, who knows? Maybe future archaeologists will say that about us. Ancient Egyptian verbs allowed the speaker to layer on their attitude. A verb could tell you not just what was done, but how it was done, even WHY, all in one word.
Okay, now that is impressive. Emojis have nothing on that level of expressiveness. But this intricate language, with all its changes over time, what ultimately became of it? Did it just fade away as Egypt changed hands throughout history?
It's a common misconception that ancient Egyptian just disappeared. In reality, it underwent a fascinating transformation, evolving into a language called Coptic. And here's the kicker. Coptic survived well into the Middle Ages.
Wait, seriously? People were speaking a descendant of ancient Egyptian just a few centuries ago? That's mind-blowing. What happened to Coptic? Did something make it die out?
Like most languages, its fate was tied to historical shifts. As Arabic rose in prominence, Coptic's use dwindled. But even though it's not used conversationally today, it still exists as a liturgical language in some churches, a living link to that ancient past.
That's incredible to think about this direct thread connecting back to the time of the pharaohs. It makes you wonder how much influence ancient Egyptian still has today, even if it's hidden.
You've hit on a key point, those hidden influences. While Arabic is the main language of Egypt now, it would be a mistake to think ancient Egyptian left no trace. It's in the vocabulary, pronunciation, even some grammar, like those layers we discussed earlier. Language leaves its mark.
So even though ancient Egypt might seem far removed from our world, we could be carrying around pieces of it in our language without even realizing it. Are there any specific examples of words we use that have roots in ancient Egyptian, besides the obvious ones like, mummy?
Mummy is a good one, for sure. But you're right, there have to be more subtle connections. Well, how about something that evokes luxury and ancient craftsmanship? The word ebony, that deep black wood we still prize for furniture and art, originally came from the ancient Egyptian HB&J. It took a winding path through Greek and Latin to reach us, but those roots are unmistakable.
Ebony. Wow, it's like holding a piece of history when you say it now. I never would have guessed. Okay, give me another one. What else has those hidden hieroglyphics in our everyday speech?
Let's stay on theme with beautiful materials, though with a more ethically complex history. Ivory, that prized and sadly, often cruelly obtained substance, also has its origins in ancient Egypt, from the word wu, again a word that journeyed through time and languages, but its core meaning remains.
It's amazing how these words connect us back to their world, their values, even if we've moved beyond some of those practices, thankfully. Okay, I need one more. What's a word that'll really make me see those linguistic echoes everywhere?
This one might just change how you see your feline friends. Cat. There's strong evidence that this word itself, so simple and universal, now has an ancestor in the ancient Egyptian language. It really highlights how deeply intertwined our language is with theirs, even after all these centuries.
Cat. You're right, that does change things a bit. It's not just fancy words or historical terms, it's right there, purring on the couch. This whole deep dive has been incredible. We've gone from deciphering symbols to uncovering hidden word origins, all from a language thousands of years old. What's the big takeaway here, do you think? What makes ancient Egyptian still matter today?
For me, it's a powerful reminder that language, even when it seems lost to time, never truly disappears. We've talked about a language that saw empires rise and fall, a language that adapted and evolved over millennia, and yet its echoes are still present. Not just in museums or ancient texts, but in the very words we use every day.
It really makes you wonder, what if ancient Egyptian hadn't faded as it did? What if those unique features, those expressive verbs, were still actively shaping how we communicate today? What a different world that would be.
It's a tantalizing thought experiment, isn't it? How would our linguistic landscape look if ancient Egyptian had continued evolving alongside its sibling languages? Would we be using those efficient constructs, those layered verbs? This a question I'll leave you, our listeners, to ponder.
A linguistic mystery for the ages. I think we've given everyone a lot to think about today. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of ancient Egyptian. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious.